Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mentor Nation podcast. If you don't know by now, my name is John Abbas and I am your host. And I love doing this, guys. Every week I get to interview people doing great things and I get the opportunity to ask them questions that can hopefully help you in your own journey of life and business. And one of the things that I'd mentioned back in December, if you were listening to this podcast at that time, is that my big focus for the new year and the beginning of 2021 was to really bring guests on the show that can help you improve a specific area of your life, like finances or business or health. And I plan to do that. I've been doing that. And in my personal opinion, especially as an entrepreneur, one of the single most important things in all of business, if you own any kind of a business or if you serve people in any way, one of the most important things on earth is the customer experience. And if you serve customers in any way, the experience that you provide will ultimately determine whether they come back for more business and whether they tell others about you. I can't remember what the statistic was, but I think it was Starbucks that did this huge survey, and it showed that a positive customer experience, somebody will tell like 3 other people, but a negative customer experience, somebody will tell like 10 people. So it's so important to get that right. And that is why I'm bringing on a customer experience master on the show today. Carolene Meli spent 10 years with Cirque du Soleil running all of their events all over the world. Now, if you know anything about Cirque, then you will know that they are world renowned. Like they are famous all over the world for creating unforgettable shows for millions of people day in and day out. I used to live in Vegas and I remember going to my first Cirque du Soleil show. I think it was O. And the next day I was telling everyone about it. I was just blown away. And the tickets, they're not cheap. They're like a couple $100, but it was just such an incredible experience. And Carolene is one of the people that is responsible for that. Now, here's the real question though, especially about Cirque. What goes on behind the scenes to make something like that happen? How does something like Cirque du Soleil sell thousands of tickets every day, packing out shows day in and day out? And how do they keep people coming back for more? Well, what Carolene is going to talk about today is just that. And she's going to share some wisdom on how all of you, no matter what you do in your business, can create epic experiences for your customers in order to turn them into raving fans. She's such an incredible person, and it was just really exciting to have her on to do this interview. And she's doing it from her home in Montenegro, which is on the Balkan Islands. It's a place that I've always wanted to visit. So although I wish I was there, at least I was able to talk to someone and interview them who is there. And so without further ado, please help me welcome Carolene. I just want to thank you for being on the Mentor Nation podcast. I'm excited for this interview and thank you for being with us today.
Absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to it all day. So let's dive in.
Yeah, I'm in Nashville and you are in Montenegro, which obviously we have more access to things like Uber we were just talking about, but I think you're in a little more of an exotic place. So again, thank you for being with us today. I'm excited. For those listening, I really want to focus this interview, if you don't mind, on just the mindset and the strategies that entrepreneurs listening today can use to create life-changing experiences for their customers or their employees, obviously to create better loyalty, repeat business. And I'm very excited because there's nobody on earth I can think of better to share these strategies than you because of what you've done with your life. And so, you spent 10 years with Cirque du Soleil, and I know most people are familiar with what that is, maybe even been to a show, but can you just take a minute, if you don't mind, and just share a little bit about Cirque, what you did with them, and just what that whole experience was like for that decade?
Yes, and I'm going to start by saying that I wasn't an acrobat because that's everyone's first question. I did grow up a gymnast, but there's no way that I would ever be at that caliber. So I'm definitely not an acrobat or like a trapeze artist or a clown or anything like that. I worked in the front of house team. So to give you a little bit of understanding about the inner workings of touring at Cirque du Soleil, we had on every tour, no matter what, where it was in the world, there was a front of house team. So they basically looked after everything that involved the guest. So we had about a team of around 10 of us, and we ran the different departments such as box office, the bars, the merchandise boutique, the VIP, the ushers. And every city that we went to, we were a team of 10 that would travel full time with the show. And every city we went to, we were kind of given a local team through a hiring agency. We would train them, onboard them, and then they would work for us for those 6 to 8 weeks. And then we would go to the next city and do it all again. So I repeated that process for, like you mentioned, around 10 years, all over the world, in total 17 different countries. And wow. I actually did every single position in that front of house team, but I specialized in the VIP experiences. That's the minute I got into that VIP lounge, that VIP area, I knew that that's kind of where I wanted to continue hanging out. I loved the element of the VIP experience and what it actually added to the guest experience overall. So I spent most of my time there, but working in this environment, you not only are you changing teams, you're changing languages, you're changing culturals, you're changing behavioral psychology. Like you get very good at kind of learning through those different environments. So wow. That was that constant changing process, which for me was the most incredible part of it.
So your role there, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, is obviously, I've been to several shows. I lived in Vegas for some time, and, tickets, they weren't cheap, but God, man, when you leave, you're just blown away. It's so worth it. And that there's somebody responsible for all of that experience, right? From the minute that you walk in to the minute that you leave. I was just blown away. I mean, everything was so meticulous and it was so perfect, and it hit you visually and emotionally. And so I'm assuming that, someone like yourself, you're responsible for that. Like, you have to think about things that even the customers aren't thinking about. You have to notice it. So like, how intense was that? Like, what kind of training does that entail to blow people away like that?
Yeah. So one of our main goals, and one of my goals personally, especially in the VIP, was how can I make the experience around the show as good as the show? Obviously, that's a very tall task, right? Because as you mentioned, whether you're watching the show in Vegas, whether you're watching the show in a big top in some city around the world, it is always going to be great. You may love it, you may not like it that much, but the experience is going to be incredible nevertheless. So how can we as the front of house team live up to kind of that standard? And it's very difficult, obviously, for many, many reasons. There's 2,000 to 2,500 people potentially each night going into that. And I'm speaking specifically about the big top. That's the capacity of the big tops. And, so you have this large pool of people that you have to cater to and try to satisfy in some way. So that is the first consideration, and that was always our goal as the teams. No matter where we were in the world, no matter who we were working, which country we were in, we were striving for that goal. In terms of training, I think the most successful managers in my roles were the ones that actually were very observant, very aware, and implemented very quickly. Because if you think about it, we had this incredible testing ground, because we did have repeat guests in a city run of 6 to 8 weeks. You had the super fans that maybe you saw this one couple that came back 3 to 4 times, but in general, people are coming once. So you have this incredible turnover of guests, which means that you can actually play a little bit with your strategies. So on one night, in the VIP, maybe on one night, I wanted to tweak a little bit how I did the entrance of the VIP. And then maybe it worked amazingly, and then I would continue to implement that. Maybe it would be terrible, and then the next night I would change it again. So it was this really interesting environment where you could really play around with the actual service that you provided. To some extent, obviously, you're not going to go and change everything because you have that brand to uphold. That's right. However, within the different parts of the experience, there was a lot of room for that kind of tweaking. And the best way really to do that was, like I mentioned, being very aware of the surroundings. And for me personally, is leveraging my local staff, because the staff were local. They spoke the language of the guests. I can speak a couple of languages, but for the most part, it was potentially in places that I couldn't speak the language. And I didn't know the behaviors at the beginning, especially after I've been there 2 or 3 times, or I've been in that country for 6 months, you pick it up. But the local staff were my kind of insight into the world of the guests, into the mentality of the guests. And I was able to use my local staff to actually create some incredible impact through their insights. And, a lot of managers don't necessarily value the expertise and the background of their staff a lot of the times, because they're below them, and, it's you do as I say in different environments. And I really found so much value in, all right, guys, let's work together. You guys are the experts at these guests in particular. Let's work together and create something amazing. So that was the training, really, is just implementing and learning.
Awesome. So I want to get into a couple specific examples before we transition into obviously helping business owners. Because I'm really fascinated by that. Like, obviously you have something like Apple, right? Like they built beautiful, sleek, well-functioning products. But for something like with what you did, and you tested things, you had the freedom and the autonomy, like what are some of the things that actually work? So obviously, just as a specific example, you were in charge of VIP. Like what were some of the things that you did that, like, was there 1 or 2 things that you can just name specifically that just wowed people? Like whether it was a small thing or a big thing, like what were some of the things that you implemented that worked for what you did?
Yeah. So it definitely depended on the environment, because we were outdoors, right? So we spoke about Vancouver before. We were in Vancouver for 3 months at the end of the year. So it rained every single night pretty much. So the outdoor experience of the VIP, I had to change that very quickly, because nobody's going outside and standing out in the cold in the rain. So I had to bring the element, the outdoors in. And so within my VIP, I kind of looked around and thought, all right, what are the elements that people enjoy outside? Maybe there's we had really beautiful lighting outside, the heat from these warm heaters. How can I bring that inside so that they still feel like they're having this experience and they don't feel like they're missing out on anything? So in a city where the weather was against me, Vancouver was an example. Other examples were in Europe, where it was very cold, potentially snowing, or conversely, when it was 40 degrees Celsius and nobody's going outside either, because they're going to sweat, their body weight away. And so those were opportunities for me to say, all right, let's bring that element inside to the tent and make the inside as best as possible. So then we're playing around with furniture configuration, bar configurations, to make sure there's no bottlenecks, to make sure that when the guests actually arrive, where are they gravitating towards? And I actually always started my training with my staff with a walkthrough of the area. And I just observed them, and I gave them a little form to fill out. And it was, you arrive, the minute you step into the VIP, what's the first thing that you notice? The very first thing. It could be anything. It could be a light. It could be a merchandise stand. It could be the bar, anything. And then where do you go and sit? I was very interested in that. Where are you going to go and sit? There's all those case studies about people when they get on a bus, like where do they go and sit? And so, all the single seats will fill up and then people will start doubling up. So
that's right.
It's really, it's this really interesting, almost like psychology about where are people going to go and sit and where are they going to gravitate towards. And based on my findings with my staff, for example, I was able to go, okay, you didn't notice the bar there? Okay, you didn't notice that hot carving station for the food? That wasn't the first thing that you saw, because for me, that's what I want to be the focus, Or, did you see how to get through to the bathrooms that are at the back? And so that's what I was playing with. And so based on that feedback, then I was really adjusting. So that was the first element, is that flow, right? Flow is very important and underrated. Think of how many times that you go into one of those stores that is just chock-a-block filled with every piece of plastic that you could ever imagine, and you can't get, and then you knock stuff, and then you can't even get through the store. So that's an example of why flow is so incredibly important for the guest experience for how they're going. So those are a couple of strategies that I use.
That's awesome. And I appreciate the specific examples. That's how, my mind thinks a lot of times is like what actually worked for what you did. So thank you for sharing that. So obviously you spent a decade, you mastered this. And then, at some point you got the idea like, wow, like I can teach other people how to do this. There's a framework, there are strategies, there are mindsets around this. So talk about how, like, when did you decide that, what, it's time to do this on my own as an entrepreneur and help other businesses do this? Because we're going to get into some really exciting things in a minute, but when did you make that decision? How did you come to that decision? And how long have you been doing it?
Listen, COVID made that decision for me. It wasn't a completely autonomous decision, but for many years that I had this in my head, because on top of the element of Cirque du Soleil, I was a full-time traveler. I've been traveling for as long as I can remember, even growing up. So I was constantly experiencing things throughout the world, whether it was a supermarket in another country, a restaurant, right, whether it was a tour, no matter what it was. And there were so many average experiences that could have been amazing if only there was just a couple of and I'm not talking big things that needed to be changed. It was like attention to detail, better understanding the journey of the guest. And I almost was a silent, really terrible critic or harsh critic, because I was just like, guys, come on, that's like right. This would, there's this and that and that. And a lot of times I actually would sit down and give them feedback at the end, just for giving them feedback. And that's where I really thought, wow, there's so much potential here. And there's so many incredible people creating incredible experiences around the world to help us learn about the world and to help us learn about tradition and languages and new foods and impactful events that are going to transform us. But there's just so many elements of the experience that are not thought out. And I thought, you know what? I have that expertise, and that's where I can add value. And so as I finished my year with Cirque du Soleil, we actually, we stopped because of coronavirus. Then I thought, okay, this is it. This is the moment. Let's pivot. And now as people are transitioning their experiences, because obviously live experiences are going through a huge shift, how can I turn this into a business, and how can I create what mark can I leave on this world in terms of creating impactful, transformational experiences that people are going to remember for the rest of their lives? That's
all. And people need this, especially newer entrepreneurs, because especially people that are making that transition, there's so many things that you have to think about, right? And I think that customer experience a lot of times gets put on the back burner to other things, because people are like, okay, marketing and operations, and how do I do this? And the thing that I believe is the most important is the thing that they tend to focus on last. And so I'm really excited to get into that, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast, and most of them are juggling a million different things. And I want them all to know that, the customer experience is number one. Like, if you look at the most successful people in the world, if you listen to their interviews, especially Jeff Bezos with Amazon, right? Listen to any of his interviews, and I swear every interview, at least 2 minutes of it is like, we just obsess over customers. We obsess over customers. And so, you started working with an entrepreneur. So let's say that I'm a newer entrepreneur. I come to you and I need your help. What are some of the things that, the mindsets and the strategies that you would cover with me first to help me get in the right mindset and the right expectation for how I can start to make a difference? What are some of the things that you talk about?
Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there are so many things to think about. If you're creating an experience, my goodness, of course, there are so many things to think about. And that's why I specifically focus on one thing, and that's the actual experience itself. And that's how the guest experiences whatever that is. And so the first exercise that I always do with my clients is, how do you want your guests to feel once they leave your experience? No matter what it is. It could be anything, but how do you want them to feel? Because this is going to guide how we are going to create this experience. And again, how often do people think about that? Not that often, unless unless maybe you are running like a transformational retreat or something like that, where transformation is the goal and you want people to feel that. But how do you want them to feel, And this is the first thing. So it's literally a matter of writing down a bunch of emotive words, adjectives, like how do you want them to feel? And then I do that for how I want my clients to feel. And I have that stuck on my wall. And every day I'm looking at that and making sure that that is my guiding light in a way to everything that I'm doing. I'm living up to that. That's what I want the guest to feel. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is really having a deep understanding of the journey of the guest. And so oftentimes we focus on the one main event, right? So we focus, if we have like a main event in the experience, that's all we focus on. And we don't think about the other examples. And I'll give you an example from going back to Cirque du Soleil. If we only focused on the show, the bars were terrible. We hardly offered anything. The lineups to the bathroom took, 30 minutes. The front of site security was a nightmare. Like,
right.
They made you unpack everything, and then they were rude. The parking was terrible. If all of those elements were absolutely shocking, even though the experience of the show itself, it would have been incredible, and you'd be like, wow, you would always explain that experience to someone and say, but the show was incredible, but the parking was terrible, the security was terrible, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to make sure that the experience from A to B is exceptional. And for, especially right now in the virtual space, that could really be from the minute they open your social media or their website or your website. That's the start of their experience with you if they've never met you before. Do you have spelling mistakes? Like, is your landing page like just full of words? Like nobody wants to read a novel, Is the picture pixelated? All those elements like of a great website. That's the first step. And then how you're building that relationship with them before and then afterwards as well. So understanding that entire guest journey is crucial, and it is something that is often really put on the back burner. And that's really where you see breakdown in the experience because.
Right. Right. Oh, I was just going to say, like, I'm taking notes here, and I'm so glad that you said that, because I think a lot of people, and even myself included, we focus on the big thing, right?
Yes.
The big show. Like, I own a preschool, and so it's just like, the care of the child, but it's all those little things leading up and all those little things after that are equally as important that most people just miss, right? Like if I was detailing cars for a living, I don't need to put 100% of my time in just making sure their car looks good, but there's like, what's that first experience did they have to drive to me, or could I have, driven to them? Like I'm so glad that you said that, because there are more things to think about. So I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
That's okay. I wanted to add that in an experience, everyone is going to have a defining moment, right? So take any experience that you can think of. It could literally be the supermarket that you went to this morning. It could be a childhood memory. Doesn't matter what it is. There was a defining moment in that experience, and defining moments can be good. They can be bad. Obviously, we want them to be good, but it could go either way. Our goal is not to make the main event the defining experience. Our goal as kind of experience creators is to create as many opportunities as possible throughout the entire experience for there to be one defining moment. And chances are the defining moment is going to be different for everyone. And you as the owner, the creator, it's probably going to be different from what you think. And I'll give an example. When I first arrived in Montenegro, I stayed at a really beautiful 5-star luxury small boutique hotel. And I stayed there for a couple of nights. The hotel was incredible. The views here in Montenegro are just ridiculous anyway, but the views were incredible. The food was incredible. The hotel was outstanding. Do you know what my defining moment of that trip was? When I arrived at the airport, I came from Vancouver, so it was a long haul flight.
Yep.
I was picked up by the driver of the hotel in like a luxury minivan. In the backseat of the car, there was a little wooden tray that had a fresh flower, a little warm towelettes, a little box of these little like petit fours, like these little sweets. And then there was a note that said, "Welcome to Montenegro, Caroline." So this is the moment that like it is so vivid in my mind. And that is the moment out of that entire experience that I remember, and that it was my favorite experience of the trip. Now, if you're the hotel, do you think that's going to be the be all and end all of the experience? Absolutely not.
Right.
That probably cost you €1 to €2. That probably was an afterthought, to be honest. And so my experience was not that crazy expensive room, that incredible view, that 5-star dinner. It was literally this little wooden tray in the back of the van. And so that's what I mean when I say, how can we create as many opportunities throughout the entire experience for there to be defining moments? So that is the goal.
I love that. I have a preschool here, and we have the same philosophy, right? Like, the first thing that we focus on are the 5 senses. When a parent comes in and she tours the place, we always focus on, like, okay, what do they want to smell? Something this smells great, an incense or an air freshener. And then we're like, okay, obviously we need to make the corridor colorful, something that's very welcoming for children. And so we have that same mindset. And it's so powerful that you say that, because it can be applied to any industry. I mean, I had a guy on the podcast, and it was awesome. His name was Jesse, and he owns a baseball team called the Savannah Bananas. And he took a team.
Name.
Oh yeah. He took a team that was losing money. Like, he got the team for pennies on the dollar. They're losing tons of money. They had like thousands of seats, and they were selling 6 to 8 tickets a game when he came in. And he sold it out right away. And he says almost the exact same things that you say. He just took it from start to finish. And he these little things, but he made it so different. He overhauled it. And now they're sold out years in advance. All the seats, season tickets, became a multimillionaire doing that, has fun every single day. And it's so refreshing to hear you say that. So I want to finish up by just, you have a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this, that we're all going through COVID, all of us at some point or another. We're all affected, whether most of us, it's bad. Obviously, some industries are hit worse than others. Why do you feel now more than ever it's so important to think about the things that you're talking about, especially with the situation that we're in right now?
I think one of the reasons that I kind of get up and get excited to come and open my laptop every day and have these conversations with clients is this year's been really tough, and there's so much negativity, and there's so much isolated living, really isolation, so much polarity in conversations, and a lot of experiences have suffered, like physical experience, live experiences. And for me, really, it's about how can we bring that magic back, whether we know it or not. The experiences that shape our day are so incredibly important for our mindset, for our motivation, for the positivity that we bring to ourselves, but then we exude to others around us. And that all comes down to the experiences that we go throughout the day. If you imagine if you wake up and you have a bunch of errands to do, and every single person that you run into on these errands are rude to you, you have to wait a long time. Obviously, that's the case right now, long waiting times, you can't wait inside. There's all these like different rules and lines on the grounds and all sorts. And so how you feel coming home at the end of that day is you're going to feel exhausted. You're going to feel negative. You're just going to feel fed up. Imagine if every single touch point that you had throughout your entire day was incredible. What a difference that would make in not only for you, but everyone around you, and for all of those people that you touch on a daily basis. And so for me, that is why this is so important right now, is because there is so much power in incredible experiences. And I truly believe that it is very easy to achieve an incredible experience and to impact your guests, whether it's guests, whether it's clients, audience, your community. And if we just put a tiny bit of focus and effort onto what we've been discussing throughout the entire podcast, I think that we can create a lot of positive impact in a time where sometimes it is very overwhelming and there's so much weight on our shoulders. And so that's really what I'm trying to do on a daily basis and trying to achieve here, and really bring that magic and that life back into the experiences that we have, whether it's a day-to-day experience or whether it's a big event that you're potentially trying to put on. For me, they're one in the same.
That's awesome. I think everybody listening can feel your passion. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about that. And I mean this when I tell you, I think for any business owner that's listening to this right here with you is one of the most impactful and important interviews. We do a lot of interviews here on marketing and branding, but at the core of it, I think what you're sharing and what you're covering is just so critical and so important to dive into. And that leads me to the final thing. I want to recommend your work. I want people to follow your content because I really feel like people need to listen to this. And I really mean that. I think it applies to every business. I have a lot of guests that some of the philosophies they teach apply to a certain group of people or a certain level in their company, maybe after they hit $1 million or maybe when they're first getting started. But what you're covering applies to everyone all of the time, no matter where they're at. It's something you need to think about. So you just started a YouTube channel that everyone needs to subscribe to. So can you share a little bit about that? Where can people follow your work, get more of your content, stay in touch, and then connect with you?
Yeah, so the Experience Creators is what the YouTube channel is called. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Creating experiences is what I love to do. And like I've touched on throughout the interview, for me, it is very important right now to acknowledge how important and impactful incredible experiences can be. And there's so many incredible people around the world that are doing just that. And so the Experience Creators is a celebration of experiences and how it can really transform those around us. And so it is something I've just started. I'm interviewing experience creators from around the world. I've done a couple of episodes already. And honestly, I've never enjoyed something so much as I've enjoyed this. I kind of get off each interview and I'm like jumping around by myself in my apartment and I'm like, this is amazing. and it is something that is another element to my business, to my personal brands, but something that I think that can bring a lot of value, especially in my particular case, for those that potentially don't have the budget to maybe hire me. I work one-on-one with companies, with individuals from a consulting point of view. I also lead workshops as well for a group, maybe a team or a group of people. But this is another element that obviously costs nothing, and there's so much learning that can be done because each guest comes from completely different industries, just like you in your podcast. Right. So there's a lot of learning that can be done and that you can grab and then implement into what you're doing as well. So the Experience Creators is on YouTube, and then LinkedIn and Instagram are my main platforms, and it's my full name. So you're going to link it below.
I'm going to put it all in the show notes.
It's a bit of a weird spelling, but you can click the link below. And I love hanging out on Instagram and connecting with people there. And so
that's awesome. Well, this was a pleasure. I want to finish it up by just asking you a couple personal questions. So out of all the countries that you've been to, which one did you fall in love with the most? What was the most beautiful? What just blew your mind since you've been all over the world?
It's super easy. Greece is the answer. And
really,
if anyone listening to this in a year's time, so at the end of 2021, I will be living in Greece. That is my goal right now.
What part? Mykonos, I think that's Mykonos? The place I want to go to.
No, Mykonos, it's a bit too touristy for me. Okay. It's one of the main islands. I don't know yet. I've spent a lot of time in Greece, but I haven't found the exact place. But when you're traveling, you often, you see many things. You see a lot of things that initially is incredible, like you're wowed, but then after traveling for a while, it gets a bit the same. And
right.
Even though I've traveled to 42 countries now, Greece did something to me, I can't really explain it. It's a feeling, and if anyone's that's traveled and that had a similar feeling knows, it got to me. It got to me deep in my core, and there's a lot of things that I learned about myself. And my last name has Greek heritage, and there's like a Greek goddess is there. My middle name is the name of a Greek goddess, and so I'm kind of joining all of these dots. And it is for me the place where I found the nicest humans in the world. So that is hands down my favorite place. And I'm actually learning Greek right now.
That's awesome. Well, I wish you all the luck in the world on this journey. I have no doubt that you'll be there in less than a year. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us today, for pouring into the listeners and just giving them something. I mean, obviously 2020 is almost over if they're listening to this live, and 2021 is here. Everybody's setting goals, and you've just shared something that I think is really important. And I just want to say thank you for your time. And I really hope to have you back on the podcast again when you're in Greece, sharing even more wisdom. So,
thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation. I've loved every minute of it.
Thank you. Thank you.